Welcome back. Happening now, despite their efforts to be set free, a federal appeals court is upholding the convictions of two major players in the Saratoga County-based sex cult NXIVM. Cult leader Keith Raniere's 120-year sentence and co-conspirator Claire Bronfman's nearly 7 years behind bars will continue. Raniere was convicted of numerous crimes related to his self-help group and a secret society inside the cult called DOS. These crimes included racketeering, sex trafficking, forced labor, among others. Raniere appealed the verdict, but the Second Circuit Court upheld his and Bronfman's convictions. I'm joined now by former News 10 ABC reporter Ayla Fitzpatrick. Ayla was at the forefront of the NXIVM investigation and coverage, and she's followed these developments as they've come in. She joins us now from Greer, South Carolina. Ayla, it's so great to have you on the show today.
Thanks so much for having me, Juliana.
My first question is, what evidence or arguments did Raniere's team really think were grounds for throwing out his conviction?
Well, I'm sure you've read the decisions that came down yesterday, but he was arguing about a dozen issues. First, he started with insufficient evidence presented to the jury. This includes things that relate to those charges of forced labor and child exploitation. Now, those charges of forced labor, conspiracy, and racketeering act, he basically argued these when it came to a specific DOS member, saying that instead of these being labor or services, they were actually personal favors and kind gestures. So that was one of the things he was arguing. He also argued that the prosecution didn't prove that there was conspiracy to alter records, and anyone who paid attention during that trial knows that Mark Vicente, when he was on the stand, actually testified to the fact that he had firsthand knowledge of those altering of those videos. So obviously, the appeals court also saw that and basically said, you don't have any grounds here. And then the main thing that Raniere was arguing was that those racketeering and racketeering conspiracy charges, which our viewers will hear us kind of refer to as RICO charges, that there was no enterprise to base these charges on. Of course, the court saw that all of the prosecution's evidence did support these charges and upheld Raniere's sentencing.
And they've also upheld the sentencing of Claire Bronfman. What does it really say about this organization, NXIVM, that two of its main players, even after being found guilty, getting handed these punishments, hearing victim impact statements, they still continued to fight from prison?
Well, I think one thing that's important to remember is that this is pretty standard in any court proceeding. There's going to be an appeals process, especially when you have something high profile like this. So that's number one. I also think it shows that Raniere and Bronfman still believe that they didn't do anything wrong. And there are a lot of people out there who also believe this. You can see very publicly that there are people still on the side of Raniere saying that DOS was a good thing, and they got a lot out of it and that they agreed to these things. They're very publicly still out there supporting him, even though the courts obviously are ruling in favor of the prosecution even still today.
And what are your final thoughts looking back on years of this cult being investigated, prosecuted, made into television shows, and still continuing to have movement in the courts? It's been a couple of years since Raniere was sentenced. It's really hard to believe. But what are your final reflections?
It is really hard to believe, really, how much time has passed since this has all started. And I think the most important thing to remember, and this is something that we've been talking about since the beginning, is that these are real people who are impacted by this. It can be really easy to forget that when there are shows on HBO and Stars and all these salacious details coming out. But there are real people out there impacted by this case who are still doing a lot of healing today. I think anyone who has been watching this second season of The Vow can see that kind of firsthand with a lot of the interviews that Nancy Salzman has been giving, which brings me to another point of this is an interesting case because a lot of the people who are being charged in this case can also be seen as victims themselves. So there definitely is a little bit of a blurred line there, and I think people have trouble kind of recognizing, well, should I feel sorry for this person or should I be happy that, they're getting this sentence that they feel like they deserve? And then I think the final thing that is important to pay attention to is that updates like the one that we're talking about right now although maybe not as salacious as some of the previous details that have come out, are very important because this is a precedent-setting case. These RICO charges being brought against a high control group like this, the NXIVM case is the first time that it's ever been done. And it's being used as a precedent in other high profile cases like the R. Kelly case, like the rapper case that we're seeing in Atlanta right now. These used to be only used for, mob cases, drug trafficking, things of that nature. So seeing these RICO charges kind of be moved in the court system to be used in these situations where people are being hurt every day and it is contributing to this new precedent that's being set. I think that's something that's really exciting about these updates as well.
Absolutely. And of course, we know it all started here in the capital region, now having national implications. We know that it even had international ties as well. So something that you did a great job following closely here during your time at News 10. We're so glad you took the time to speak with us this morning.
Thanks so much for having me, Juliana.
Thank you, Ayla.